Hello, hello. Good day to everyone from everywhere joining our panel, which is the last event uh, of this 3-day symposium and kickoff of the SAAI Factory hackathon. Together with Mohammed El Husseini, who is joining us here. Yes, I can see you. Mohammed and myself, we are going to moderate this panel, but also all our incredible team members like Sarah, Isha, and Anab. And if I forgot someone else here, please excuse me, that are helping with any questions or issues and you might have. So I would like to start this panel with a very quick introduction to 3 persons, because not all of you have been joining us through the last 3 days, and they are just new faces. So just give me a second, and I will just present Sean, Leah, and Isaac, and then I will be handing over to Mohammed. So the most of us already have now just met Sean, but to those who haven't, he is Sean Blacksfeld, and excuse me, I also have never really pronounced the last name, so I'm saying Blacksfeld, is the CEO and co-founder of Dara.network, a community platform for change makers and institutions that support them. Sean previously headed partnerships and growth for Marco Polo, the video chat app. Earlier, he was the founder and CEO of babajob.com, India's largest digital job marketplace, with over 8.5 million users, which was acquired by Quikr in June 2017. Sean moved to Bangalore in 2004 and was the 3rd founding member of Microsoft Research India, was a program manager in the user experience team of Office and Windows. And he also was a White House intern with President Clinton's internet policy czar, Ira Magaziner. So I'm coming to Leah Coleman. Leah is an artist, AI researcher, and educator based in Puebla, Mexico, and her interests lie in AI for artwork, online education, and public murals. These days, she helps others learn how to create artwork with AI and teaches online workshops on creating AI art with Derek Schultz. Leah has taught at Rhode Island School of Design as a visiting AI artist and researcher in ML art. And recently, she collaborated with the Partnership on AI to create a field guide for artists to use ML in an ethical manner. In 2019, Leah's AI research and artwork were accepted to the NeurIPS, Machine Learning for Creativity and Design workshop, where she presented a poster of her research. And continuing now to Isaac Sullivan, who is joining us today from a ferry, I guess, in the Mediterranean Sea. And Isaac is a Dubai-based artist and writer exploring technology and its relationship to altered perceptions of time through video installation and sonic intervention. Recent exhibitions include Personal Structures, a 2019 Venice Biennale collateral hosted by the European Cultural Center, 2018 the Tashkent Biennale, and Beirut Design Wing, among others. Sullivan serves as assistant professor of visual arts at Zayed University in Dubai, where his research interests include artificial intelligence, sound art, and the problematics of space and place. So this is from my side, the introduction of 3 participants in this panel, and I'll hand over to you, Mohammed.
Great. Thanks, everyone. You have been a fantastic audience, and I feel really honored to have all of you today with a fantastic set of panelists. And let me start by introducing Nigar Rostamzadeh, and please excuse me if my pronunciation is not so accurate. Nigar is a research scientist at the Google Brain Ethical AI team, where she studies social impact of machine learning technologies, and she's interested in retrospective research in computer vision technologies and evaluation systems with ethical perspectives. And part of that actually is our today's topic, creative AI. And prior to that, she was a research scientist at Element AI, working on computer vision, cross-model learning problems, and particularly in a low data regime. Nigar, she received her PhD at the University of Trento in a multimedia and human understanding group, where she was advised by Nico Sipi. Her PhD was centered around video understanding problems. So let's welcome Nigar to the stage. And thanks you for joining us. Our next panelist, Celia Binyut. She is the head of business at Visual. Celia has significant experience in AI in connection to creativity in both fashion and art, which is amazing. Visual uses creative AI technology to create personalized and engaging images for brands. And Celia also participated in managing Sensorium Festival, where she was in charge of the international partnerships, including EU grants and many others, and other strategic projects. And this relates also in some transformation of festival events that relates to COVID-19 context. Maybe she can share with us today more about that. She was also a strategy and projects manager at Walters Pioneer. Please also excuse me if my pronunciation is not so accurate. Where she was also working on developing artistic and applied research project in this space using deep learning technology. Welcome Celia to the stage. And our last panelist, I'm also honored to introduce Luba. Luba Elliott is a creator and producer, researcher specialized in artificial intelligence, and she has contributed a lot to the establishing the significant workshops like the NeurIPS Creativity and many others. She is currently working to educate and engage in a wider audience about the latest development of creative AI through talks, exhibitions, and tech demonstrations at venues across the art, business, technology spectrum, including Photography Gallery, Victoria and Albert Museum, Impact Festival, and also like organizing workshops in top venues like NeurIPS and ICCV. Recent projects include the Art AI Festival, the online gallery AI Art Online, the machine learning, the NeurIPS Machine Learning for Creativity and Design workshops, and she's also an honorary senior research fellow at University College London Center of Artificial Intelligence. Luba obtained her undergraduate degree in modern language at the University of Cambridge and has a certificate of design thinking in Hasso-Plattner Institute in Potsdam. With that, I would like to welcome all you to the stage, and we have list of questions, but also I want to the goal here is actually to enjoy the discussion, and please feel free to raise any questions. We can guide the conversation in towards a direction that we feel that we enjoy the most. So I think I would start by a very general question. We came through different, we covered a lot of topics in this symposium that in connection to language generation, writing, music, sound, animation. I was really impressed to see, for example, the use of GPT technologies in some of the demos in connection to the use of deep fakes and also GPT together, which with GPT-3 in Sean's demos, and earlier I have also talked about how he used these language technologies to also guide interactions in games, which is quite exciting. And it was a perspective that I felt really ignorant about. So maybe we can start by asking where do you think these technologies are currently working and where they fail, and what are the things that we need to be more careful about. So with that, let me open the discussion, and please feel free to cover different perspective that you may have. Um, uh, maybe Nigar, can you tell us more about since you have worked on organizing workshop that relates to the ethical consideration of these technologies, where do you think our things are working fine and we are developing this technology for good, and where we need to be a little bit more careful? Maybe we can start from this perspective.
Thanks, Mohammed, and hi everyone, and glad to be here. On this question, actually, like it's very hard to specifically talk about a line that like this part of this line is like ethical research in this domain, or like the other side may not be like really ethical. So some aspects, like I'm personally really interested on the fashion side, and some of the issues that I could have seen was mainly like on like fashion recommendation systems could have been like very amplifying gender stereotypes, and also like other kind of stereotypes like in some forms of fashion. And then when we are training these models with large amount of data, so this kind of biases could actually get more amplified. And then another aspect was on a risk of cultural appropriation. So one of the concerns that I had initially was that, well, I'm working with fashion images which are mainly coming from Western cultures. So would that help if I add so many other clothes items from other fashion cultures, like African fashion cultures, like Persian fashion cultures, and like Eastern fashion cultures, and like, is it going to help? But then like there is a risk of cultural appropriation. So what is the line of this like cultural appreciation and cultural appropriation if we want to have models that we are training with large amount of labeled samples, and then we want to use generative models? The other aspects that might be interesting to discuss is on like this copyright and ownership and licensing. Many artists like create like some art pieces, and so how can actually like they have the ownership of the art piece that they're creating with artificial intelligence? Or like what if someone is actually an artist is spending time and their art to generate a new form of art with some art pieces that was existed before? So what is this line of copyright or ownership, and how can artists protect themselves? And many aspects.
What are your thoughts about that, Nigar, if you want to?
Actually, like I'm not expert on this part. Like these are all the questions that was in my mind. So I was co-organizing a workshop this year with Luba on ethical considerations for creative applications of computer vision, because these were the questions that I had also in mind. That like, how can we protect? Like, if there is an artist, like we can't say that these arts are generated by AI, because AI is a tool that we are using to generate those pieces of art, which involves creativity, but also at the same time we are training, like if it's a generative model, sometimes you're training on some data which might be existed there. So it's very hard to actually draw a line here. And I really want like to see the discussions around this with policymakers or people who have more knowledge and expertise on basically copyright issues, and see where like how we can protect ourselves and our arts in this kind of frameworks.
Can I make one comment on that? Which is, hi, I'm Sean, and we've been making stuff around RAGBots. And one of the reasons that I got into computer science, right, and one of the things that I marvel at why software is eating the world, is that we get such incredible reuse of other people's work, right? If you think about the lines of code that when you write a piece of software today that you are building on top of, it may be approaching the billions. And so one of the things that software does, it allows each person's creative contribution to code, right, to be leveraged by literally tens of millions, if not billions of other people. And I literally think this is one of the things that frankly gives me hope that we might actually solve climate change, because our ability to exactly leverage the innovative capacity of every other human being on Earth is accelerating. And that's wonderfully exciting. And so, you know, from my perspective, where does copyright land in that? And it's like, well, what layer are we talking about, right? When you go, like, is it just the last one of like, oh, I took this code sample from this person, but like, what about all the code that lists underneath that? What about the network level? What about the API level? What about the work that Tim Berners-Lee did back when they created the internet? Like, you know, I look, when we run Dara, there's a notices file that Flutter creates, and that's 2 megabytes of text of the copyright notices of all the code libraries we're using. And like, at some point, we're going to end up with millions of code libraries that any piece of code is going to be built on top of. And so I just think we have to have a new paradigm that acknowledges, like, it's not this thing of like, oh, there was a record sample and you use that one hook in your record sample, and that's like, okay, I can think about that. But there are millions of references that you're making with every line of code, and like, do they all need to get paid out? Like, I don't know. But I do think we have to rethink it in a way that acknowledges like this problem is going to get way crazier, and that's good as the future goes forward.
I want to add, like, I mean, that was like a really great conversation that you brought up. Like, I mean, even like in terms of coding, like we have this like people add like MIT license on their codes, like when they have like different kind of licensing. And this again, like goes back to the degree that like this work is used. Like, I mean, if someone just like take another person's code completely and then like add a decorator on top, or like something which is not like, I mean, it's not giving enough credit to what happened in the beginning, or like what was the original source, then that may also make issue. Like it could be the fact that, I mean, even like artists, when they look at the work, like they get inspiration from many works. We can say that, oh, like generative models is like getting inspiration from many other research, many other generated form of arts. And then like this combination of this art pieces is creating this new piece that is like getting inspiration. But like, where is this line? Like, I mean, you mentioned that there are like millions of millions layers of complications in this process, but where is the line? And like, where is okay to have to actually like use exactly the things that was existed, and where is the line to get give specific credits to specific art pieces or prior works?
Thanks
Yeah,
so much. I would like to ask a question. So I think here this perspective is really nice, and I think we have in the panel, Leah have spent a lot of time working creative AI for art herself. So maybe you can comment on that from the art perspective, Leah. And maybe Celia have worked also in both fashion and art. Maybe you can add more for your perspective on fashion and art. And then I would ask maybe Luba to share some of the lessons that that you have learned in the ethical consideration workshop that relates to that, so that we can share with everybody. So maybe we can start. Leah, if you feel free to share your perspective on that.
Yeah, like building off of what you were just saying about inspiration, and how like as an artist, like usually when I'm trying to create a piece of work, I go and look for inspiration, and then like use pieces of those like other artists' pieces in my own work, but not in an explicit way. And like the way that it's different when you're training on data or like other people's data is that the connections are very, very explicit. Like you have this data set and you know exactly where it came from, and like what parts like are coming from like which JPEGs. And yeah, it's just like it's a very different process having like your brain be the generative model versus like training a neural network and then having that neural network spit it out based off of like this data set. And there are a lot of questions of like ownership and like as an artist myself, it's important for me to respect other people's work as well, because I'm very aware of like the labor that goes into it. So for example, something that happened recently was I trained a network on a photographer's Instagram page, and I asked them outright directly, like, can I use this? And they're like, yeah, feel free to. And I posted some pieces, but then later on, a music producer approached me and was like, I really like these works. I'd like to license them. And I was like, oh, I need to go ask the original person first. But yeah, it's just kind of like you get into like tricky, hairy situations where there is, you know, someone else that wants to use it, and then you're in the middle, and then someone like it's based off of someone else's data, and you have to sort of, yeah, like there it is a gray area. There's a lot of yeah, just sort of things you have to think about and try to just, yeah, be considerate of the other people. But yeah, it is a gray area and like uncharted territory.
I feel like power needs to come into this though, right? Like certain jurisdictions like the US have patent laws for things like software, and those are not enforceable in a bunch of other countries. And so India doesn't have software patent laws, for example. So if you're in the US, you can sue other people for stealing your software, but if you're in India, you can't sue those people, right? And so, and I'm reminded of, you know, the story of Newton and Leibniz, right? Newton and Leibniz invented calculus at the same time, but Lou Newton happened to be head of the Royal Academy of Sciences, so he got the credit, right? And so he was in an empowered place where basically history was written in terms of who gets to win and who gets to ascribe their idea. And so I just think your ability to lawyer up here matters a lot too. And let's just remember that's not a universally distributed right, nor empowerment, nor like anything else. So I just think, I feel like that part gets lost a little bit in all this too.
Yeah, if I may add something to the inspiration part and using other artworks, I will just here quote a comment from a conversation I had with a painter, a fine artist who does like really traditional paper-based work, and like we were talking, she was trying to understand what this whole AI art thing is about, and she asked me, like, how can you say the machine or the algorithm creates artworks or generate artworks when it has not been trained on artworks, but on images of artworks? So what it creates, what it learns to create is an image of an artwork. It's not the artwork. And I have to say this question like kind of shut me up. And I was like, yeah, you may have a point here. I was thinking like this whole idea of the artwork itself versus the image. Of course, maybe that's a bit more touchy, more like this difference is more related to fine arts and maybe a bit less to photograph, as you in the example that you quoted, Leah. But in terms of copyright, this also adds a layer of complexity, because yeah, you're not feeding the algorithm with the actual Van Gogh painting. You're feeding it with an image of the Van Gogh painting.
This is mind-boggling.
Sorry?
This is mind-boggling.
Yeah, like it adds a layer. And then who took the photograph? And like, then do you need also to include this authorship of the photographer of the painting in the attribution? So I don't know how this is going to evolve in terms of legal and protection of these rights. But what I would imagine is that we would get closer to something like laws around plagiarism. That is because, as you said, Leah, and I think it was Nigar as well, like artists and creators have always taken inspiration from others. And Nigar, you mentioned the issue of cultural appropriation. I think it's a bit the same, that creators also have been taking inspiration from other cultures, from other artworks, everything. What creates a problem is that when the output is actually so close to the input that it can pretend to be like a replication of the input, and like when this is when it gets to plagiarism. And so I would assume that the laws around creative AI would be similar to the laws that protect authorship against plagiarism. This would be my bet as to the direction it would take, because I don't think you can control data sets and use of data sets. And like, what if I went to the museum and photographed, like I paid my ticket and then I took a picture of everything in the museum? Like, of course, I should be allowed to feed my algorithm with this. And so I think what will matter will be what you create with it. This would be my bet on how this will evolve.
May I take from here over one thought, maybe? Thank you very much. And because you put up one issue, I think that leads into a discussion that is more focused on the art historical or art theoretical questions around that. And as you said, well, it's a picture or a photograph of an artwork and so on. So that leads to one question that I had, or I always had, but it also came up when we had the first day, the presentation of Ahmed El Gamal, and that's like the question is, we have been talking in AI art a lot about style, you know, like style was something that somehow the machines could learn very fast with machine learning, and so it's all about the style, but that's not like, that's the you know, the difference between the artwork and the picture. Maybe there's something of the same in the word of concept of style. Yeah, it's a surface. So yeah, you're using this superficial notion of style, but how can we judge the artwork itself? So and that has come to a very complicated situation. Maybe not. That the question is now, how can we, what is the criteria to judge on AI art, and what is how can we do that? So as from a perspective of an art historian, that I'm not, you know, I'm an artist, but do I need to know math, you know, to judge about the quality of an AI art, or is that of no need, because I can just judge upon a style, well, yes, a habit of style? So I would maybe, if that was somehow clear, I would like to hand that over to maybe Isaac, to think about the question. I mean, what makes the AI artwork an artwork? Yeah, that would be nice, Isaac.
Thank you, Christoph. I think that's a very interesting question. And if we were to think from strictly a formalist perspective, of course, it would be possibly not able to be answered by somebody who, like you said, doesn't know mathematics. I suppose we could look at the attitudes, the sensitivities, and the concepts behind the algorithms that went into the art, or the way that the artwork is deployed, channelized into the world and encountered by others. I mean, we can ask this question about any kind of so-called experimental work of if art is simply the process by which the perceiver and the perceived change each other in time, well, that means art and life are not different, except for in the Duchampian contextual sense. However, but we can ask, what happened? What happened when the artwork was deployed into the world? What happened when someone encountered it? So it becomes less a question of technical skill, right? And more a question of magnitude or impact. I want to respond to Celia's point too in this vein, because I'm really interested not only in how AI is changing how we make artwork, but also in what ways will it change how we hear? Like AI produced music, will it change how we hear? Will images produced by an AI change how we see? I mean, if we think back to the turn of the 20th century, when we saw the invention of electrical devices and long distance communication, this gave rise to a widespread interest in seances and mediumship. And this in turn then influenced the practices of many poets, for example. William Butler Yeats has an anecdote about taking dictation from his wife who is speaking with a ghost on a train, and so on and so forth. So Celia, back to your point, thinking about the impact of AI going in the other direction, not necessarily the artist going into the AI process, but the AI process going out into the world. I think it's really important that you're pointing to mediation, because a lot is at stake in terms of how not just the artworks are mediated, but we are mediated, right? Just to give you an anecdote, I have a friend who's gallerist. As the artist was working on a series of works, asked the artist not to make the works all black because they were impossible to photograph or very hard to document, and thereby, picture via Instagram. So you could argue already that the mediation via Instagram changes the aesthetics of some painting, because some photographs better than others. And furthermore, the qualities of our mediation even reshape our bodies as people get plastic surgery in response to the angles of cameras and so on. So I'll leave it there. But generally speaking, I'm interested in, I guess I would like to ask the group which new feeling intensities, behaviors, aesthetics, superstitions might arise en masse. Now, how will artists respond to this? Artists at large, and also artists working with AI, if you were to speculate.
Ruba, can you comment on that? Like, you have spent years and years on curating a lot of AI art and looked at these technologies. So what are your thoughts and perspective on that, Ruba?
So certainly kind of, my thoughts on kind of what makes an AI artwork valuable, or how to kind of distinguish them is, so I guess I always, try and see what people from different sides of the community are doing, because I think the type of art that, scientific researchers can be quite different from kind of fine art trained artists, and also kind of new media arts graduates. So everybody's been making like quite different art. And I think I've always tried to judge it across at least kind of, one category. So one would be kind of the aesthetics. So what does it look like? Is there kind of innovation or something interesting done in the way the image looks? Because I think quite a lot of people from the technical community focus on that aspect. And then the other side would be like looking at the concept, which is where I think a lot of the people from the media art community might be kind of very strong in, because that's what they've been kind of taught to develop as part of their work. And I guess sometimes both of these are great, but frequently it's kind of been one or the other that's been like particularly strong. And in the types of kind of projects I do, I try to certainly foreground the work done by the technical community, because at times I felt that's been a little bit underappreciated. But yeah, I think it's good to see a mix of people's kind of interpretations and ways of working kind of with AI, because of course not all of it is just kind of, generating kind of images, or not all of it kind of makes its way into the final product. Some of it's used as kind of inspiration or like other ways. So yeah, that's my thoughts.
I want to add a comment on one of the points that Celia mentioned. So you talked about data and data sets creation. So one of the aspects that I think might be interesting to see is that, like, if we, like, part of our concern is coming from the fact that we don't know what those data that was created, like what was the mediums on data creation, what was the previous life cycle of those data. Maybe that data was also created by another artist. So I feel like because data sets is something that we we create, and then not only ourselves will use it, maybe like so many other people were also using those data sets. So I feel like documentation of these data sets would be very helpful to just having sources of contact, like just a manual documentations of everything that we do with creating large scale data, or data that other people will use for creating other art forms of art. That could help, like in like before like having all these policies around or having a specific rules. Like if we can have some documentation which shows what's the origin of these parts of data or art, like that could be also very, very interesting, I feel. Yeah.
I think this focus that everyone here has brought out on data sets, I think really matters. And I'm often reminded of this quote from Jared Diamond, who wrote, you know, the price that we'll pay for not annihilating ourselves with nuclear weapons is complete cultural homogenization. And these data sets and the tools that we use seem to be pushing us toward that, right? That, you know, all of the language models are largely based on English writers on the net, and there aren't good text-to-speech engines for Swahili, or, you know, the languages that don't have great data sets that are supporting them, that are allowing those things to come into being. And what I worry about is there are actually very few great data sets, and there are very few great APIs that have the scale to run them. And hence, whatever cultural biases that we have that led to that creation, actually, I think will get reinforced. And then I think, to Isaac's point, then the medium affects so much of what people need to do to make a living, to gain status and put out there, that all of those things, I think we have to be extremely conscious about trying to push in other data sets and other perspectives that we haven't digitized well. And if we don't do that soon, I think those subcultures will in time be annihilated within a generation. And I think there's a real risk of that.
That's an excellent question. Like how to approach the making of these data sets in a way that is representative, not just of the average. I mean, I'm thinking a little bit of the so-called Gangnam style problem that YouTube had a couple of years ago, when that was the most viewed video. And if you just let the algorithm run and choose the next video and the next video, all paths led to Gangnam style. So they responded to this by making the recommendations be actually super like what you're looking, but more niche or more obscure. And there are those who argue that actually the popularity of certain conspiracy theories and forms of extremism are partially related to the fact that you get these more and more niche recommendations as well, on the other hand.
This is really interesting. Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was just saying this is really interesting, like how like this two ways of thinking. Either you go fully mainstream or very niche, like as if like you have to direct it either way. I find this really interesting as a thought about culture.
It does remind me of a story I heard of. There's this guy that was the director of AI for Lowell's, which is a hardware store in America. And he got a call from one of his store managers about, you know, there was an AI algorithm that recommended which products to place at the end of the aisles. They're called the bookends at store. And they're like the impulse purchases. And the store manager called him up one day and he's like, hey, why does your algorithm keep telling us to put together meth kits at the end of the aisle at Lowell's? Right? So like everything that you need from the hardware store to build your own meth lab, that's what they kept putting at the end of each aisle, because that's what the algorithm discovered people need to buy together, and they often did, right? And so if we don't intervene, right, then clearly many of the worst and niche parts of our humanity will come out from those APIs and those algorithms as well.
Then how do we mitigate these biases? Let's say we talked about these technologies in language, in like the GPT we have seen impressive demos in the context of like chatbots and also games, right? But we know that also GPT was trained on a large corpus from news, and this news could be fake and things like that. So how can we act on this to make future systems less biased? And maybe you can have a conversation about what that means in chatbots, what that mean in art, what that mean in fashion.
Yeah, on this for now, I would I would totally agree with Sean. Like, we need to intervene at some point. I see it like on a simple example in fashion, in the work I do with visual. So what we do basically is we create virtual try-on solutions. So we allow any like a fashion consumer on an e-commerce website to choose a model that they identify with and see the clothing on that model instead of the standard fashion model, which is usually a tall white person. So we trained, like we got the largest data set we could of like clothing and the clothing worn on a model, like these pairs, and we trained the models on this. And at first, like a few months ago, we realized to our horror that our model was not very good on fat bodies. That when we wanted to see the clothing worn by a fat model, the result was, yeah, like glitchy and not very nice. And this was very disappointing because this was basically what we were selling. This was what we wanted to showcase the world. Like what we want, the product we wanted to create was a product that would be able to dress any human body. And we were just not able to build it properly because the basic data set was not good enough. So we had to like go back to the data set, go back to the training, and like curate, really like fine tune, add more plus size fashion lines, whatever. Like we had to go, like it was not as simple as we had thought, let's say. And so we had to go back to the crafting of the algorithm to make the product serve the purpose that we wanted it to serve. But this was, yeah, like a typical bias problem, like typical data bias problem. So yeah, I would say intervene and like check that your algorithm is not biased.
We should acknowledge that's inherently political. Right.
Yes. It like it's just what it is. Like we need to acknowledge that that we have to be careful and that we have to check and that we have to manually intervene and tweak it, because things will go wrong. And AI is not magic, and it's just a fantastic tool that helps you go faster on a lot of things. And but it's still just a tool, and yeah, garbage in, garbage out as usual. So
yeah, building off of that, I also want to highlight that like what is bias and what is not is also a very subjective question depending on who's making the judgment call. And so like, yeah, like you as an individual might think like, okay, I'm looking for this, but if someone else in your shoes who like came from a different background were in your same spot, they might have a different idea. And so it's also important to have like diverse teams behind all of the development of the technology. So that it's not just like one specific demographic that is making the call of like, this seems good, like we'll put it out.
I have one question to that. So would it be possible to create a network or AI that would have no bias? So that would be, in advantage of any human who is, as far as I understand, somehow ever influenced by his, her, its own bias. So what would happen if this AI would be without bias? What do we think about that? Is that really something that we want to have? A superhuman AI?
I believe it would be impossible, and the people in power would then tell you it's unbiased, and it would clearly be biased.
I agree with what Sean said. Like, I mean, I feel like unbiased towards what? Because like if you're unbiasing a system with respect to one attribute, it could bias the system towards the other attribute. And it's like very hard again, like to draw a line that this model is unbiased. Like, so it's very important what to specify exactly what are the priority of the system. If you're going to unbias the system, or like I won't say even unbiased, I would say like reducing the biases of the system towards one system. What's the reason that we are considering those as priority of the system? And also continuing what Celia and Leah mentioned about this, like this biasing against, like, I mean, Celia mentioned biasing over against like overweight people, people with higher weights, and Leah mentioned like biases towards which community. I feel it would be great if in applications, in productions, in things that matters for a lot of people, to involve people who are impacted by those technologies. So not just like having a group of people thinking about finding all biases or like some biases, but also involving and bringing in people who would be like directly impacted by those technologies, people from different demographics, people with different sizes and weights, like in fashion industry or genders, and then see how we can prioritize those issues before going to make the system like very perfect.
Yeah, on this, I saw a few months ago a very interesting presentation by some philosophy students who were researching on the topic of data labeling and the impact it may have on on biases in the data sets. Basically, the starting point of the research was, would it be useful to bring back the some of this data labeling work, which is done overseas, usually like in very there's a lot of it that's done in Southeast Asia, and like it's very centralized in some areas of less privileged countries. And they said, like, would it be the starting point was, would it be useful to bring this back to the Western world? Like, how would this impact diversity? And diversity in the labeling, in the data, how would this impact biases? And what was really interesting, like, it was at the end of their research, their recommendation was to not consider labeling as a job, but as a task, and to spread it along the value chain of AI making. They were saying, like, this should not be a job that's allocated to a specific type of population. It should be done by everyone, basically. And of course, this was a not very applicable recommendation. Like, it's very hard to put it in place, but it made me think a lot. And as these were philosophy students, so their recommendation was not like meant to be an actual action plan, but it was really interesting to think, data labeling is such an important work, and it's such an important foundational task in the making of the data sets, the making of the models, and hence like all the results of what will be made with the AI, that it's interesting to think of it as so strategic that it should be done by everyone and not just by a section of underprivileged people who are then reacting to pressure from mainstream and power structure and existing power structures, etc. And like I thought this was really interesting to see it that way, and to see it as so central that it should be done by everyone in order to make it diverse and impactful.
Yeah, maybe one thing I'd like to add, I would like also to share with you from like from machine learning research perspective, and I think maybe Nigar can also add to that. This is a very exciting domain also that the machine learning community is excited about. Like, how do we mitigate bias, and how do we I would say formulate teaching signals for machines so that they perform well on both men and women, and I would say so that they perform well, let's say, based on white and black people. And the way this is being done, for example, is to just have some to stratify or to group to define the groups that based on which we want bias to be alleviated, and just encourage them all to be as accurate in all these groups. So check the performance of a fashion or a fashion model, for example, on the group of based on groups of based on the weight, for example, of some person, or based on the gender, and check the performance as you change from one group to the other, and see, and that way we can measure, let's say, this could be one way to measure the bias, but this is not, of course, not the only way. But one way that we do to explicitly mitigate this bias is to add to the neural network that teaching signal, that if we feed you images from that group, you should be as accurate as your prediction of accuracy should be as accurate across all groups. And maybe Nigar, if you probably have know more about this perspective, you may add to that if you like.
That's a very difficult question, actually. Like that's like how to mitigate, or like how to make sure that the systems are not biased, because like first, I mean, it's again like it has like multiple layers of complexity. Even like definition of biases in different systems is very different, like how we can define like if this system is biased towards which group, which demographic. And I feel like one of the aspects that I think is very important is also like involving this kind of considerations in all layers of power structure. Like what's the demographic of this research group who is working on this problem? I mean, in my research group, maybe like no one is like really thinking about this as an issue. Maybe like since I don't have anyone from this demographic group, maybe like this question is never coming up. Like, I don't know if you've seen that work from Joy Bulumvini, Coded Bias, and also the Coded Bias documentary, that she was talking about the fact that like her face was not recognized with this face detection systems back then when she was a master's student at MIT. And then when she put a white mask, the system was able to capture her face. And this was not diagnosed before her because there were not enough people who were testing for those systems whose skin is dark. So it's very important like to have this people from multiple like demographics into the power systems, and also to be able to identify what are the things that are considered as bias to be able to mitigate for them. Also then in data collection, power is a very important aspect. So who is collecting this data? Who is the labeler? Like, I mean, Celia mentioned about the labeling aspects, like why are the fund which is spent on labeling is not as much as it should be. And also like another factor that I learned during the last year, because I was working in a group which was like very, had a good diversity and inclusion aspects, was that we also need to have like socio-technical researchers working with us, because sometimes there are some biases or some stereotypes that are rooted in society, and how we can identify them, how can we mitigate those specific biases. And not everything could be like very generalizable. Like we can't say that we will be solving these biases for this specific task, and then it would be generalized for all other tasks or all other like retail issues or other kind of tasks like object detection or other problems that we have. So it should be very, very task specific, application specific. So yeah, I feel it's a very complex question and very interesting one.
Thank you, Nigar. I would like also to encourage the audience, if you have any questions for like for the panel, you can feel free to raise your hands and ask questions. So yeah.
To pick up on Nigar's point, though, of like there are some forms of bias that are in society that need to be, I think, handled legally, right? In terms of, like, let's imagine a facial detection algorithm used in a retail store, right? Then it's very possible that that retail store may figure out that their most profitable customers are white dudes. And hence they should really optimize to spend all of their sales energy on white dudes, because historically that has been the way to maximize their profit, right? And you can imagine all sorts of systems that are being built for companies that are effectively doing the same thing when they're doing lead scoring on incoming e-commerce sites, though it's not quite so clear. right? And we may come to simply say, that's illegal, right? We don't want to basically reinforce that power hierarchy that said that for basically, yes, you know, these people in the past with these easily detectable traits, right, happen to be statistically better buyers for our product, and hence we should give them sales. And so I just think we may get to the point where we say that certain types of labeling and certain types of attribute detection based on, you know, codes that are in constitutions all over the world, you're not allowed to discriminate on basis of race, gender, everything else, that we may say that those have to be put into our systems as well, right? And it's not just a technical decision, it's also a political decision that we as a society make to say, no, you just can't do this. It may be technically possible and we may try to address it, but we think it's wrong. And then it gets to the, you know, a fight of like, well, did the Republicans versus Democrats win that year? And thus, you know, is that law going to pass or not? Again, it comes down to, you know, as I said, inherently political decisions. But I do feel like all of these algorithms are largely reinforcing existing power structures. And if we want those power structures to continue, then we can leave the bias. But if we want them to change, we're going to have to intervene.
There's a question to Luba again. Luba, what's with when we talk about quality, what's with the criteria of Instagram followers when you are curating an exhibition? Do you look how much people follow an artist?
So personally, I don't even actually think of Instagram, because a lot of the artists who kind of work with AI, some of them come more from a technical background and they're actually more active on Twitter. And I think that's actually a platform where I see a lot more kind of AI art. And I don't tend to look at the number of followers because I know they can be bought, right? So yes. It's just very tricky. And there are some artists who are, I think, like very successful in AI art, and you look at their Instagram or Twitter follower accounts and they don't actually have that many. They might even have like a few hundred, but they are probably the more important artists in the field. So yeah, it's not really a criteria I look for.
Thank you.
All right. Do you want to comment on NFTs? I think it's kind of related, and it's an exciting topic that has gained a lot of interest in the past several months.
Oh yeah, NFTs. Yeah, they've sort of like dominated my newsfeed a bit this year. I think together with kind of Clip and Dali and all their generations. And yeah, no, I think NFTs are great because they've enabled a lot of the digital artists to kind of sell their works and kind of provide different ways of kind of allowing more people to collect it. And so I know there was, I think, a peak of interest in kind of March, then I think maybe it slowed down, and I would be curious to see how it develops kind of in the medium and longer term. But yeah, it sounds like kind of a lot of the artists managed to, a lot of the artists who've been in the field for a while, they've managed to, I guess, sell their creations. And there's been a lot of kind of newcomers who always kind of come as soon as there is a trend. But yeah, I think it does present a lot of great opportunities for kind of artists, and I guess I'm just curious to see how and if it will kind of stay for the longer term.
Isaac, do you want to comment on that?
Sure, yeah, I've also been reading a lot about NFTs, and I was invited to sell a work via NFT, which for reasons I won't get into now, I chose not to at this time. but I have no major objection to NFTs. I think they're great, actually. And I do think that the most interesting works are yet to come. I think that especially the capacity of artists to stipulate a smart contract that goes with the sale of the NFT may open up a lot of interesting possibilities. I mean, I'm thinking of Yves Klein selling Gallery Air. I'm thinking of Duchamp's Monte Carlo bond. Like, what are some interesting moves you could do with the smart contract part of the NFT? Would be some territory that could be worth exploring. I think too, there is sort of a gap right now, a little bit maybe, between many of the people who are really engaged in buying NFTs, as people probably know, are people who have a lot of cryptocurrency and might want to diversify. And many of those people may not be necessarily engaged with the field of contemporary art. I don't see any inherent problem with that. People should like what they like and buy what they buy. But I think that there are also interesting possibilities for something like a hackathon or an incubator type of event where you bring together somebody who's, thinking creatively from the crypto kind of sphere, and somebody who's thinking creatively within the contemporary art field, and just see what they come up with. I'm smiling at Sean's comment there. Yeah, diversify equals change crypto assets without taxes. I mean, I guess that art collecting has been used to avoid taxes for quite some time, and just one more flavor of that, I suppose, too, in some cases.
I mean, the only comment I would make is that my greatest hope is with NFTs that there are more people in the arts that make a living, right? And I just think, especially with COVID, so many sectors, especially in the performing arts, have just been crippled, and you just have people leaving the field. And so if there's a new way for livelihood generation to happen in that field, I think it's inherently good. It's a weird place of rampant speculation, and and also, the art market has always been filled with people that are manipulating things like a cartel, and we've formalized all of that, right? Like, all of these things are mostly in it just so that they can buy assets and bump up the price of their own assets so that they can continue to do it. And so NFTs to me represent these weird confluence of like the hyper computerization of finance with a little bit of art, right? That's happening as a sideshow. But if more artists can make a living, I don't view that as a bad thing.
Quite right, quite right. I should add one more thing that could be interesting, in my opinion, is the way that these NFTs are being purchased and displayed sort of creatively in the metaverse, which often we're used to seeing digital works. I guess at the beginning of the pandemic, it was, okay, let's have our exhibition as a virtual show, and let's make a white cube. Let's render a white cube and put things on the walls of the white cube. But if you look at the ways people are exhibiting the digital works they acquire in the metaverse, it's quite a lot more inventive. I wonder if that can then in turn radiate into ways of installing works in the material world as well, and churn up some new ideas.
I think we have one question from the audience. Shaima, I think, please feel free to go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, so I was thinking about previously when you all were talking about how we should cite the data set, or if we use a data set from someone or their pictures, then maybe we're generating something that must be cited by that person. But as humans, whenever we generate new art, it's always inspired by something we've seen or a location we've been to, and it's based on our experiences. And when we input that data set into a machine learning model and it generates new art, especially if the art was that it learned on was not one specific painting and we're not overfitting, then in my opinion, I don't think it's a copy of art that has been, it's like a new creation. It's based on something we've seen, but it's not like stealing someone's idea, you know, it's not plagiarism, in my opinion. But what do you guys think?
Can share how I feel about this. Like, I think this is true that like we can also get inspired by other artworks, and it's just like where this line we can draw this line, like how much of this is like it looks like inspiration, how much is this is like memorization of the network, because generative models could actually go and memorize some parts of the other artwork and just generate the same thing as part of that new generated art. So where this line is drawn and what are the regulation is like, I mean, like having more transparency about the process of data collection, the data that we are using could be helpful to see and check, like maybe manually, like how much of this is a copy of a work that was there, or how much of this is actually just like inspiration for this newly created art. I think it's a very important question. And as I said, like I don't know the answer about this line, but I feel like there should be much more conversations around this topic. I would like to hear like if anyone else have.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
I mean, I'd like to make sorry, go ahead, Christoph.
Oh, maybe I'm still on the other track. So I just wanted to add a short impression I had on this NFT discussion, because it just, excuse me for being that naive, but I had a feeling that it was just opening up my eyes on a possibility to really establish like a ecosystem for the arts. So that there was like a missing stone somehow, that without the possibility of having whatever economic system in the digital space, a lot of artworks still would have gone in they didn't really find, or would have found their place in this digital space that we already inhabit as artists, as people, as anything. So I think with placing this and giving it a space and a possibility to somehow being linked to whatever financial interest that is, somehow close the circle for me in a long evolution of immaterial arts, of digital art, of social art, of participation, of producing artifacts that we have left the museum space for such a long time as a contemporary artist, I would say. And where are these works? They are hard, speaking from my part, my position as a conceptual artist, it's very hard to, get, let's say, a market for a lot of artifacts that artists are having produced in the last 20, 30 years. And that doesn't have to be specific digital artworks, but, even other artifacts. And they somehow now seem to have a place where they belong. And that was, so for me, it was intriguing with this NFT discussion that I just came up like last year, end of last year. And I thought that really made sense to me. I just want to add that to that discussion on the NFT space. Yeah.
Right. Thanks, everyone. I just want to say that what I feel now, what I feel now, I feel really amused about all the rich perspective that we have brought to this discussion, from like coming from like covering things like AI bots, fashion, virtual reality, sound, music, and all of this amazing stuff. And I just want to share with you that the goal of this kind of conversation is to, I think, engage more to have more engagement between AI research and artists, and that perspective made these meetings really so much enjoyable for me. So I'd like to thank all of you to contributing to this experience. That was so much enriching for me, and I believe for many others here. So I think these conversations, I would say, I would love to do it more and more. Yeah, thank you for your contributions to the panelists and for the audience. And yeah, with that, I think I would like to thank the audience and everyone. And
one important
yeah,
thing.
I want to say something. Yeah.
Yes, if we would have been on a physical in-person panel now, I think we would have some flowers or whatever to hand them over to the facilitators of the 3-day symposium, which are Arnab, Isha, and Sarah, who have done an incredible job, in organizing a lot of stuff in a very short time and making that happen, which I never believed would really, work that fine. So thank you both, you three, and maybe I missed someone. So if that is I'm going, deeply into my, but thank you all for making that happen. So thank you very much.
One final note is that just a gentle reminder, we have a social event on GatherTown. If you're interested to connect with others in GatherTown, we have that announced on the web page, and also we like to encourage you to share with people if you are interested to submit an artwork. We have a deadline for the hackathon on September 17th, and the prizes and the winners will be announced on September 25th or something. So thanks so much for being a fantastic panel, and also thank you for being a fantastic audience. Yeah, and hope that we have more these discussions more often.
Absolutely.
I want to say thank you from my side as well. It was really an incredible experience. Hosting you all and listening to you all, like my inner mind is exploding with inspiration and thoughts. So thank you all so much. And since you mentioned flowers, these are virtual flowers for you all. Thank you so much for being here. And of course, thank you so much to Christoph and Mohammed. I think that the SAAI Factory is going a good way. So it's incredible. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you so much. See you. Bye-bye.